And then once you get your structure and you see the pattern of how you're going, what you're doing as a human and just in life with Saturn, it's below the horizon, it's above, you're being motivated, you're trying to go out in the world to build up your career, you're having to regroup, all of these things, they're in your Saturn. The other planets are the disturbers that disturb all, that disrupts the Saturn cycle. They come up and disrupt, they shake it up, they shock it up, they confuse it, they distort it, they confront it. And every time it takes up some time and some attention. And then once it gets disrupted, you have to get back to your Saturn cycle anyways, or hopefully integrate those challenges along the path as you're going along on the Saturn cycle. So the work with transits is always to gather the Saturn perspective and then see how things are attached around it. So we do it by, we have our 7-year graph, our Saturn graph, which is on the left-hand top here, and we have our 8-year graph, which looks at all the outer planet aspects. Not all, the outer planets were just the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions to the personal planets and the angles, and we wrote them in so that we could see we get the sense of Saturn. Then in a quick view, we can see the main disruptions that are going on for the last 4 years and for the next 4 years. And this is our approach to timing, to get a sense of timing where someone is in the world. And a lot of astrology is just done from there, like just up to this point. Then we went through the level 8, where we expanded everything, where the deeper considerations, where we added the color, we added the different types of charts, we added the pentans and the different subdivisions of the zodiac, we added the I Ching, we added the greater divisions of the houses, and we started to see how there was this greater depth within all of these things. So it's one thing to understand a sign, but there's 360 degrees that have different meanings and different uniquenesses that we're traveling through in that same process. So you can always go deeper. And then there's even sub-degree things. So like there's always things that there's so much profound meaning there. It's like you can't, we will experience them all in our own way, or as much as our chart will allow us, or our life will allow us. But to fathom it all, there's no end to what you can be thinking about for looking at. It's more a question of knowing where to tune in and what to tune into, how to perceive it, to not get lost in this vast amount of information. So with the trends, we had to cut it down to basic aspects, conjunctions, squares, oppositions, 1-degree orbs, and then watch them. And then the phases that happen around it. And that was enough to clarify where someone's going in their life. So I can look at someone's chart, and I've done a lot of charts over 50 years. You know, like it's got to be 20. I've probably seen 15 to 20,000 personal sessions, but then radio shows talking to people doing like I can look at a chart in a couple of seconds, and within a minute, I see where Saturn is, and I see how these things play, and these things come into me, and I have that perspective very quickly. And what's disturbing it? So seeing the disruptions of someone, that's easy in a second. But I'll still spend an hour before session, the day before, working on the chart to see how I can make that useful, not what I want to say, but how is that going to be useful to that person for their natal chart, for their planets and their signs, for their sign, for who they are, how are they going to use that information? What are they going to need to get from me as a perspective, as a time perspective? So that's the work up to the transit. Then we get to the deeper thing, we start running into progressions. So the setup, understanding the pentans and subpentans, understanding the hexagrams and subhexagrams, these open up vast realms of insight from the progressions. And with the progressions, the idea of the progression was just that we're taking one day, every day after our life, it's like a year of our life. It's a symbolical thing, yes, but the symbolism has certain basis to it. From conception to birth, you got the 9 months, and you have the 9 months. From birth, we live, but we haven't completed from that conception, we haven't completed the whole cycle of the zodiac. The cycle of the zodiac is completed in the 90 days, 90 years, in 90 days after we're born. From conception, we go through, and then there's 90 more days before we've completed an experience of the zodiac, ideally. Sometimes we get more than that, sometimes we get less than that, but 90 days basically. The 90 days is equal to a lifetime, a degree for a year. That's where the concepts of progressions come from. You start with your chart and things progress. So the ephemeris for the first 3 months after you're born, is everything that happens in it is something that's evolving through the texture outwardly and inwardly in your life. That's the more mystical side of things. So by the time you get to transit, you think you got it all figured out, you can talk to anybody about anything, but sometimes Saturn will hit someone's midheaven and you think they're at their peak, and they're not. Sometimes Saturn's in a place where you think the worst things happen, and it doesn't. Then you got to wonder how come. As soon as something happens that it's not happening the way you thought, you have to rethink all your astrology. So then the progressions come in, and your progressions, your progressed sun, your confidence, your soul, it's only going to move 90 degrees. It's only going to move to 1/4 of your chart in a full lifetime. It's only going to go across one angle. It's going to go, so it's going to accentuate certain areas of your chart. So if it accentuates the IC in the part below your chart, for example, you could have Saturn in the midheaven, and you're still trying to make Saturn in the midheaven work as best you can, but your heart is not in it. You're really working through the inner things below the horizon. You're measuring things according to where you're coming from. If you had the progressed sun moving up to the midheaven and Saturn goes up to the midheaven, both the inside and the outside are working towards proving things out in the world and accomplishing things. So that wave of accomplishing is very powerful, but the accomplishing things with depth is a deeper challenge that comes. So the subjective being and the object being have a challenge. How much you tap one, how much you get of the other. If you just play the role outwardly, you can get to be present, but it doesn't mean you have much depth or sincerity. You've known how to work the system, and you know how to work out and build up things. But if you can do it to do things of different meaning, there's always repercussions to what you do. There always effects from what you put out comes back. So the progressions are your inner voice. It's kind of what your soul's learning across this lifetime. So by next lifetime, you're not coming back to the same thing. It's what you're gaining from the experiences that are happening. But sometimes the outer experiences are opposite, going in opposite direction than where your inner feeling is going. That's a different state of being than when it's going the same way. And these things happen to all of us. But it's hard to talk about these things. It takes time to work with these things. But to know astrology, to work well with astrology, you have to have considered the progressions. So it's an important thing. So really, there's 4 levels. If you're going to do a proper consultation for someone, it should be 4 sessions of an hour to 90 minutes, or an hour to 2 hours. 4 separate sessions. The first session is just interpreting the natal chart and nothing, just working with the natal chart and the main things in the natal chart and working through each planet and how they work, the attitudes, the circumstances, the stress factors. No time factor, no, just this is your healing challenges in your life. That solves a lot. That would be the first consult. Second consultation would be working with the transits and seeing the timing and where one is and where one's coming from, where one's going to, and getting tuned into the timing of your life. So you can get a plan of what to work at. And then see what challenges and disruptions come up. But that's the second couple hours. You just do a chart with the transits and the transits, how they're anchored to your natal chart. The third session that you could do is the progress chart. And these sessions, these are all unique. They shouldn't be done one day after the other. They should be done like a month apart, so the person has time to reflect on the one thing, then come back and see the next and go, oh my. And while you're doing that session, you're actually teaching your astrology. You're reviewing your astrology and go over all these factors. You have time to gather it together, energy together, and talk about it. Then you can relate to someone, and you're helping them, and you're making it make sense to them. You're just explaining how it works and showing where they are in the process. It's not really, the astrologer is not so much understanding you. We're tuning into the process, and we're making that tuning in relevant to the other person. So what we're supposed to do is really our opinion. We can give our opinion of what's going on and what this means, but each person's going to have their own meaning of how this works. To really do astrology, it's not what you want to say. You have to tune in to see what the other person needs to hear. Okay, the progressions would be the third month. You sit down and do a session for a couple of hours, and you're working on the development of inner attitudes and how you grow and how your soul grows across a lifetime and how your inner processes work. I mean, when we're looking at it, it's just mechanics, but each one is a different texture that needs to be taken concern of. And with the progressions, we had so much information, we had so many things to do that we don't usually, most astrologers cut the time down. They're going to do an hour session with someone. They shortcut the time for doing the natal interpretation. They go right into the transit. They talk about the transit. They go into that and they talk about it. And they don't even usually relate to the progressions. Well, anytime you cut corners, anytime when you're doing a session, you are tending to cut it shorter, make the time shorter, because you can't spend forever on a person's chart. You have to work within a time frame. But anytime you cut it shorter, you don't talk about the planets and the signs, or you cut off the house, or you cut off certain things, you're missing something. Your quality of what you're doing is a little bit less. It's always that way. For everybody, for me, for anyone. The minute I cut something short, I can work it. I can still be impressive or whatever, do something. But if I haven't done the whole thing, I've missed something. I haven't done real justice of doing the best I can for that person. So the progressions, which we've just gone through, all the different things with the progressions, and where things are, they can be very faded, but there's certain specific things that you can see moving on. And so that's the progressed sun. Then the fourth chart, which is what this class is about, is how do you put it all together to make one, two, three, the three things all fit together and make some consensus so you can work it without, so you can cut through and more or less take care of things. But like I said, we cut through, we cut it shorter, we do the abbreviations to see the main things and integrate these things to each other, especially the transits and the progressions. It's how the transits work to the natal chart. It's how the progressions work to the natal chart that are important. It's not the progressions to the transits. That's too far out there. Sometimes the progressions to progressions will have meaning. Sometimes transits to transits will have meaning, but they're only really critical when they're touching things in our chart. They still can happen in houses and things. There's still an influence there. But when you're trying to focus through, it's too much. You get lost in this, and usually people just talking whatever comes up in the moment, and it's really a random thing. Whatever stands out the most to talk about, and they think that's it. But that's not really the clearest perspective, having done justice to it. So in our sessions, we're going to have to cover each of these grounds a little bit, a little time in the natal chart. So and I'm going to work with the Saturn graphs. We don't have to explain how to do them. We have them done, so we got them. And I'm going to show you how to do it if you don't have time to get the graphs done, and then how to do it using the computer and just get the information so you have it. But making these graphs up is really useful. Probably the first 10,000 charts, 5 to 10,000 charts I've done, I hand typed out some of the natal interpretation planets and signs and houses, and I worked through. I wrote out these things. I worked through it I drew the Saturn cycles for the whole life. I did the 8-year graph. I've done these before computers. I did this for years. I had to write them out. So that's normal. That was normal prep work for me. And then after that, so it seems like a lot of work in today's computers. We just clip and paste. You get all this information, but you don't know how to cut through it. So organizing your material makes a huge difference in how professional, how good you can be working with the chart. Because you can't always tell if the person whose chart you're doing is at a lesser level of consciousness than you, or someone's a much more advanced being and living on a much higher level, and you don't even know how to advise them and how do you work with it. The timing and the energies of astrology are useful to people. So, okay.